The lights of Harlem never really go out. They just dim, waiting for someone to remember. In the late nights of the 1990 club scene, one voice carried through the smoke and flashing lights, a voice that turned street stories into poetry. His name was Black Rob, and for a brief moment, his rhythm defined an era. But behind the anthem that made the world move, whoa, was a man who never truly escaped the shadows he rapped about. How does someone who gave life to one of hip-hop's greatest moments end up alone, sick, and forgotten? This is not just a story about fame or downfall. It's about the price of loyalty, the silence of success, and the sound of a man still trying to be heard. Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. He was born Robert Ross on the 8th of June, 1968, in Harlem, New York, a city pulsing with rhythm and contradiction. Harlem was more than a neighborhood. It was an atmosphere, a heartbeat of art and struggle. Rob grew up in the part they called Spanish Harlem, surrounded by the sounds of salsa, sirens, and street corner laughter. To him, there was no Black Harlem or Spanish Harlem. It was all one voice, rough, loud, and alive. But home wasn't easy. His father was gone before Rob could remember his face, and his mother battled alcoholism that often blurred her love. Their relationship was distant, marked by more silence than comfort. He used to say, "I loved her, but we never had that kind of bond." For a boy searching for attention, Harlem's streets became his family, a place that didn't ask questions, only demanded survival. School should have been an escape, but poverty made it a reminder. Rob kept good grades, yet the same clothes from last summer clung to him like a label. He once said he stopped going to class because he couldn't bear being laughed at for what he wore. So, he turned to the only thing that seemed to work in a city that rewarded boldness, the hustle. He picked pockets, snatched purses, ran three-card Monte on corners. Each small crime brought quick money and a faster heartbeat, but Harlem always has eyes. The same corners that fed him also sent him to juvenile detention, to group homes, to jail. He was still just a teenager when the system started knowing his name. Still, not everyone gave up on him. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, especially the women in his family, offered food, beds, or words when he had nowhere else to go. Amid all that noise and trouble, something else started calling to him, a rhythm, a pulse stronger than the streets. It was hip-hop. Harlem, in the late 1970 and early 1980, was the birthplace of something revolutionary. Rob listened to Doug E. Fresh beatbox on corner blocks, Slick Rick spinning stories like short films, Grandmaster Caz turning rhymes into theater. He didn't just hear the music, he studied it. He memorized cadences, practiced rhyme patterns, and soon began writing his own lines in cheap notebooks, filling page after page with verses that felt like confessions. He started calling himself Bacardi Rob, after his favorite drink. There was confidence in that name, but also rebellion, a symbol of the streets that raised him. With a few friends, he formed a small rap group called the Schizophrenics, performing at local parks and community centers. The group never lasted. They had heart, but no direction. To Rob, it wasn't just fun, it was purpose. When the others gave up, he didn't. He kept writing, kept believing. By his late teens, he'd already tasted more pain than most men twice his age. Yet even behind bars, he carried rhyme books with him. While locked up, he met rapper Tragedy Gaddafi, a respected lyricist from Queensbridge. That meeting sparked something deeper in him. Tragedy saw Rob's hunger and told him to turn it into music. For the first time, someone in the industry believed he could be more than a street story. When Rob got out, Harlem had changed, but so had he. The city's energy was still wild, but now, hip-hop was becoming an empire. Labels like Bad Boy, Death Row, and Rockefeller were reshaping music. On the Bronx blocks, where Rob hung out, rap battles drew crowds the way basketball games once did. That was his new court. That's where he proved himself. One night, as the crowd formed a circle around two rappers trading verses, Rob's turn came. His flow was sharp, his voice gravel deep, full of pain and humor. A man named R.P., who was in the audience, pulled him aside after the battle. R.P. said he knew Puff Daddy from Howard University. "You got something special," he told Rob. You remind me of that hunger Puff looks for. It was the kind of moment every dreamer waits for, a small conversation that could change everything. But at the time, Rob didn't know if he believed it. He'd been disappointed too many times. Still, he kept rapping, kept showing up. Harlem taught him that faith isn't something you say. It's something you keep doing. Years later, when Bad Boy Records became the heartbeat of the East Coast, that same introduction would bring Rob face to face with Sean Puff Daddy Combs, the man who would change his life. But for now, he was still that kid from Spanish Harlem, hungry, restless, and armed only with a notebook and a dream. By the time the 1990 calendar turned, Black Rob had already lived a dozen lives. The streets had carved him, but music started to shape him. After the breakup of the Schizophrenics, he decided to go solo, no more waiting for anyone else to believe. He renamed himself Robio, still rough around the edges but sharper in his delivery. Every rhyme sounded like it was written with survival in mind. He kept hustling on the side, the only way to stay afloat. Jail was a revolving door, and each time he came out, Harlem looked a little different, more polished on the surface, but the same underneath. One stretch behind bars changed him for good. He met Tragedy Gaddafi, a veteran from Queensbridge who recognized his spark. Tragedy told him, "You got a voice people will feel." That sentence stuck with Rob like a mission statement. When he came home, he didn't want to be a headline, he wanted to be heard. Harlem's block parties became his stage. He started performing wherever he could, battling MCs on corners, rapping for crowds that didn't forgive weakness. His rhymes were stories, detailed and cinematic. He didn't brag, he narrated. He made pain rhyme. It was during one of those nights in the Bronx when fate showed up quietly. Rob was in the middle of a street battle when a man named RP stopped to listen. RP wasn't just another spectator. He had gone to school with Sean Puff Daddy Combs at Howard University. After the battle, he told Rob, "You sound like Harlem itself." Then he added something that made Rob pause. "I can get you to Puff." At that time, Bad Boy Records was still in its infancy. Craig Mack had just put the label on the map with Flava in Ya Ear. Biggie was rising fast, but the empire wasn't built yet. Rob didn't know it, but he was walking straight into hip-hop history. When he finally met Puff, the room was smaller than he expected, but the energy was electric. Puff listened, quiet at first, then nodded, smiling halfway through Rob's verse. "You remind me of the city," Puff said. "You got that grit." Within weeks, Rob was signed to Bad Boy. Puff gave him a new name, Black Rob, a name that fit like truth. The contract was worth $450,000 for 10 albums, a fortune to someone who'd once slept in stairwells. Critics might have called it a bad deal, but for Rob, it was salvation. He wasn't thinking about percentages, he was thinking about survival. Bad Boy was a machine the hitmen producing. Total and 112 topping charts, Faith Evans bringing soul, Biggie rewriting the East Coast sound. Rob became part of that ecosystem, recording verse after verse, ghostwriting for others, building his craft in the shadows. His voice started appearing on remixes. Come See Me by 112, What About Us by Total, recognized by the crew asterisk. Each feature made his name echo a little louder. He was there when Biggie was still hungry, when the office smelled like ambition and mixtapes. He used to say, "I was in the building before the lights came on." That was true, he was there for the foundation. Yet fame still felt far away. Puff had promised him an album, but as the label exploded with success, Rob waited, writing songs that no one heard. In 1997, when Biggie was murdered, Rob was devastated. He found out while in a hotel room, high for the first time on ecstasy. The news hit like cold air. He said later, "I wish Puff never kept us apart. I wish I had more time with Big." That moment became a scar, the realization that in music, tomorrow isn't promised. Through it all, Rob stayed loyal. He believed in Bad Boy, believed that his turn would come. And when Puff finally handed him a pen to help write on No Way Out, Rob felt it, the shift, the validation. He was no longer a street rapper. He was part of a legacy in the making. By the time the No Way Out album hit the shelves, Bad Boy had become the pulse of American hip-hop. Biggie's voice still haunted the airwaves. Mace was gliding over glossy beats. And Puff was now more than a producer, he was an empire in motion. And somewhere in the middle of all that motion stood Black Rob, waiting for his turn. He was featured on I Love You Baby, tucked between verses from Puffy's new solo project. The album sold 7 million copies, and though Rob's name appeared in the credits, his face stayed behind the curtain. Still, he didn't complain. For him, even a shadow inside that light was progress. "You can't rush timing," he once said. "You just gotta be ready when it comes." But time in the music industry moves differently. As soon as Puff's record blew up, Mace's Harlem World followed. Rob was featured on 24 Hours to Live, a song that became a hood anthem. His verse raw, urgent, real turned heads. It was the sound of someone who'd seen both heaven and hell on the same block. Fans started asking, "Who's that dude at the end?" For a brief moment, Black Rob became the mystery voice everyone wanted to know. Then came the Locks, with money, power, and respect, and another wave of platinum success washed over Bad Boy. Rob thought his moment was next. He had an album ready, verses stacked, stories sharpened, but Puff kept signing new names. Shine, the Locks, even changing their titles like chess pieces on a growing board. Rob waited again. Months turned into years. The curse they talked about, the Bad Boy curse, didn't feel like superstition anymore. Craig Mack was gone. Biggie was gone. Mace left to become a pastor. The Locks broke away. The empire was thinning, and Rob stood in the ruins of its golden years. Still, he believed, he had nowhere else to put his faith. Finally, in 1999, the light turned toward him. Puff called and said it was time. Rob could barely believe it. The label's vice president, Harv Pierre, brought him a beat produced by Buckwild. It was heavy, simple, hypnotic. Rob said he wasn't feeling it at first. Too slow, too plain, but he wrote to it anyway, just to get Harv off his back. He filled the hook with a word he used all the time on the streets. Whoa! When they played it back, everyone froze. Puff leaned forward and said, "That's it." The song captured something pure, the reaction to life when words weren't enough. It wasn't just slang, it was emotion. It was Harlem's astonishment wrapped in bass. Whoa hit the airwaves like a siren. DJs couldn't stop spinning it. The clubs erupted every time the first note dropped. The song went triple platinum, turning Rob from an afterthought into a headline. He became the voice of the streets again, this time on his own terms. When Life Story dropped on the 7th of March 2000, it debuted at number 3 on Billboard 200, selling over 170,000 copies in the first week. The album saved Bad Boy at a time when its shine was fading. Critics praised its honesty. Vibe magazine named Whoa the single of the year. For once, everything lined up: talent, timing, truth. But success didn't feel like he thought it would. Rob still lived modestly, still felt like a guest at his own celebration. Money came, but it slipped away just as quickly to child support, to friends, to survival. Still, for that brief stretch, he was the man every DJ shouted out. Harlem had a hero again. As he stood on that 18-wheeler in the Whoa video shoot, city lights burning behind him, Rob looked like he belonged to the night itself, untouchable, unstoppable. The camera froze on his face, sweat glistening under neon glow. He didn't know it then, but that image, strong, fierce, alive, would become immortal. Because in hip-hop, some moments never fade. They just echo forever. By early 2000, Life Story wasn't just an album, it was a resurrection. Bad Boy Records had been limping through scandals, lawsuits, and the weight of Biggie's absence. Then came Black Rob, the unlikely savior from Harlem, holding a record that brought the streets back to life. Whoa was everywhere. It played from car windows in the Bronx to dance floors in Atlanta. The beat hit hard, that heavy, unstoppable knock that made people pause mid-step. It wasn't polished or pretty, it was raw, like the voice that carried it. Every time Rob said, "Whoa," listeners felt it in their chest. The word became bigger than slang. It was a feeling: surprise, awe, power, pain, all in one syllable. The video, with Rob standing atop a massive truck rolling through the city, looked like a metaphor made real. He was on top of the world, the survivor finally driving his own destiny. Cameras flashed. Reporters started calling him the new voice of East Coast rap. He smiled when they said that, but his eyes stayed cautious, as if he knew fame could shift just as fast as it arrived. The success of Life Story lifted the label back into motion. Bad Boy was relevant again. Puff called it a comeback for the culture. The source gave the album 4.5 mics, praising its storytelling and grit. Vibe called it a street diary, written in blood and truth. For Rob, it felt like everything had been worth it: the nights in jail, the hustling, the doubt. Finally, his story had been heard. He toured the country, sometimes performing 3 shows in a night. Crowds shouted his name. People who'd never been to Harlem suddenly quoted his lyrics. At clubs, DJs would cut the music and let the audience chant the hook alone, "Whoa," echoing like thunder. It was proof that the world finally understood him. But what most didn't see was how fast that world moved. The fame came without foundation. Behind the scenes, money flowed everywhere but into his pockets. Rob was generous, almost to a fault, helping family, friends, anyone who asked. He believed loyalty was worth more than cash, but loyalty didn't pay the lawyers, or the child support, or the rent on a Harlem apartment that now felt too small for the star he'd become. Still, he stayed grateful. He talked often about how Puff had given him a chance when no one else did. He said, "Bad Boy changed my life. I'll always be thankful." That humility set him apart in an era built on bravado. Rob didn't brag. He reflected. And even beyond Whoa, the album had depth. Songs like Can I Live and Spanish Fly showed his versatility. Life Story, the title track, was almost a confession pain wrapped in melody. He called it the soundtrack of survival. It was more than hip-hop. It was autobiography. By the end of the year, Rob was everywhere: radio interviews, award shows, magazine covers. Yet, amid all the noise, he remained oddly quiet, almost watchful. Those who knew him said he seemed tired, like he'd climbed a mountain only to find another waiting behind it. Still, for that brief and brilliant time, Black Rob stood among legends. He had done what few could: turn hardship into an anthem, and pain into platinum. The lights were brighter than ever. But sometimes, when they shine too long, they start to burn. Fame has a strange silence. When the shows end and the lights dim, what's left is the hum of exhaustion. For Black Rob, success came like a storm, loud, fast, blinding, and then it left space for doubt to settle in. Life Story had done what no one expected. It put Bad Boy back in the headlines and Rob back in control of his own narrative. But control in the music business is never permanent. Behind closed doors, contracts grew complicated, and checks didn't always match the success on paper. Rob started noticing the gaps: royalty statements that didn't add up, promises that drifted away in meetings. Yet, he didn't call out names. He'd learned that in this game, silence could keep the peace, even when it cost you everything. He had plans to start his own label, to mentor G-Dep, a young rapper from his neighborhood who reminded him of himself. Together they dreamed of building something real, something that would give artists what they'd never been given. But before that dream could take shape, Puff signed G-Dep to Bad Boy directly, cutting Rob out of the deal. It wasn't personal, just business. But to Rob, it felt like betrayal dressed in paperwork. He said later in an interview, "It's like every time I try to build something, somebody moves the bricks." Still, he stayed quiet. He believed in loyalty, maybe too much. The streets began whispering about the Bad Boy curse. One by one, artists were leaving. Craig Mack disappeared into obscurity. Mace turned to the church. The locks broke free. Even Shine, the label's new hope, got caught in a shooting case that shook the whole empire. To fans, it was superstition. To Rob, it was a pattern. You could make a hit. You could save the label, but you couldn't save yourself from its shadow. Then came the money problems. Despite the platinum plaque on his wall, Rob was struggling to stay afloat. Child support, legal fees, and generosity drained whatever came in. He wasn't broke, but he wasn't rich either. "It's crazy," he told a friend. "People think you got millions just because your song on the radio, but I ain't seen none of that." He tried to stay in the studio, to keep creating, but the energy had shifted. Puff's second album, Forever, came and went without Rob's name on it. The spotlight that once lit his path now passed right over him. He was still part of the family, just no longer invited to the table. The nightlife that once celebrated him now swallowed him whole. He drank more. He partied longer. The pressure to maintain an image he never wanted began to break him down. He once said, "I was trying to live up to something that didn't fit me." By 2001, cracks had turned into fractures. The same voice that had electrified radio now spoke in hushed tones about frustration. He wanted out of his contract, but Bad Boy wasn't letting go. They still saw potential in him. He just saw exhaustion. Then came the arrests, first for gun possession, then for drugs. To the public, it looked like another rapper losing control. But to those close to him, it was a man caught between loyalty and survival. He was tired of waiting for another whoa. He wanted peace, not another hit. He once said, "When the music stopped, I didn't know what to do with the silence." That silence was growing louder, filling the spaces fame had once occupied. The spotlight that once crowned him now cast a long, lonely shadow, and in that shadow, the seeds of tragedy had already begun to grow. When fame begins to fade, it doesn't announce itself. It just stops calling. For Black Rob, the phone went quiet sometime after the applause ended. The tours slowed down, the money thinned, and the promises that once felt golden turned hollow. What had once been success now felt like survival again. In 2001, the headlines changed. Black Rob was arrested for gun possession and drug charges. The same hands that once held microphones now rested in handcuffs. The papers called it another fall from grace, another rapper proving the curse right. But behind the mugshot was something deeper: exhaustion. He'd been fighting too long, too hard, for too little. He told an interviewer later, "People thought I was wild, but I was just tired. I didn't have nobody showing me how to handle the game." He'd grown up learning to hustle, not to manage fame. Bad Boy was still moving forward, signing new artists, dropping new albums. Rob, once the label's savior, now felt like its forgotten soldier. When he came home, he tried to rebuild. He recorded features, wrote new songs, planned a second album called The Black Rob Report. But peace never lasts long when the past keeps calling. In 2004, he was arrested again, this time for grand larceny. Police said he stole $6,000 worth of jewelry from a hotel room. To the media, it was scandal. To Rob, it was desperation. He admitted later, "I did it, not because I'm proud, but because I was broke. I wasn't getting paid." It wasn't anger that drove him. It was frustration, the kind that eats away at quiet people. Out on bail, he went on the run and dropped the Black Rob Report in 2005. The album debuted at number 7 on Billboard's rap chart, but without promotion or touring, it faded fast. The beats were strong, the verses honest, but the world had moved on. The industry that once crowned him didn't even look back. It was like shouting into a storm. Then came the real blow. In 2006, federal agents found him in New Jersey. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison for that jewelry case. The headlines read, "From woe to woe again." The irony wasn't lost on him. Fame had become a loop, a cruel echo of everything he'd escaped once before. Behind the bars, time moved slowly. He tried to stay busy, writing verses on scraps of paper, mentoring younger inmates, replaying the past in his head like an old record. But the noise of prison was nothing compared to the silence from outside. No label calls, no letters from executives, no visits from the people who once called him family. He was invisible again, only this time, he wasn't a kid on the streets. He was a man who'd already touched the top. Rob used to say, "When you lose freedom, you learn who's real." Prison didn't just take years from him. It stripped away illusions. He entered that cell as a platinum artist. He'd leave it as a man who finally understood the cost of being forgotten. Prison has its own kind of silence, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that erases. For Black Rob, the hardest part wasn't the time. It was realizing how quickly the world had learned to live without him. He had once believed Bad Boy was family, but when he got sick behind those walls, he learned the truth. Years of hard living caught up to him: bad food, heavy drinking, no sleep. His kidneys started failing. When the doctors checked his insurance, they told him it had been canceled. The coverage that came with his contract gone. He called the label. His lawyer did too. The answer came cold and simple. He was no longer on the roster. They had taken him off the website, pulled his music from stores, erased his presence like he'd never existed. In an interview later, he said, "Puff came to that same prison once, but not to see me. He came to visit Lil Wayne." The words didn't sound bitter, just tired. He wasn't angry anymore. He was numb. Inside, he found a different rhythm. The noise of clanging doors became his beat. He wrote verses on lined paper, folded them like letters to his younger self. "You can't count on fame to love you back," he wrote. The other inmates called him OG Rob. They'd ask him to tell stories not about Puff or platinum plaques, but about Harlem, the block, the real life behind the headlines. He became a teacher in there, a quiet mentor to men who would never see daylight again. In a way, it gave him purpose again. But at night, when the lights dimmed and the laughter faded, he'd lie on that thin mattress and listen to his heartbeat slow, wondering if anyone outside could still hear his name. When he finally got out in May 2010, he'd served 4 years of a 7-year sentence. The world had changed. Hip-hop had moved on. New sounds, new faces, new fame. But he didn't complain. "I ain't bitter," he said. "I thank Bad Boy for the opportunity. They changed my life." There was something almost holy in that forgiveness. Most men would have come home with vengeance. He came home with peace, or maybe just acceptance. Still, the cracks never healed. He tried to rebuild, signing briefly with Duck Down Records. But his health was declining fast. The damage had been done. Doctors warned him about his kidneys, but he brushed it off, still performing small shows, still carrying the old fire that once filled arenas. What stayed constant was his dignity. Even when the crowds thinned, even when people whispered about the bad boy curse, he stood by his truth. "Ain't no curse," he said once. "It's just life. Some of us make it, some of us don't." That was Rob never blaming, never begging, just telling it like it was. When asked if he regretted signing with Puff, he paused for a long time before answering. "If I didn't, y'all would have never heard my story." Maybe that was the truest thing he ever said. Because in the end, the life story wasn't just an album title. It was prophecy written, lived, and paid for in full. When Black Rob stepped out of prison in May 2010, the city didn't stop for him. Harlem looked the same, but the rhythm had changed. The faces on the billboards were new. The sound of hip-hop had shifted from soul to spectacle. Yet for all the noise, there was still a space only he could fill, the space where truth lives. He didn't return angry or bitter. In interviews, he spoke softly, thanking Bad Boy for the chance they once gave him. "Without them, I wouldn't have made it out the streets," he said. Forgiveness wasn't weakness for Rob, it was survival. It was how he kept his spirit from hardening completely. He started working again, slower this time, with gratitude in every verse. He released Game Tested, Streets Approved through Duck Down Records, a fitting title for a man who had earned every line the hard way. The album didn't climb charts, but that didn't matter anymore. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about leaving something behind. He said in one interview, "I ain't trying to be famous again. I just want people to feel me." That was always the essence of Black Rob: realness over recognition. He performed at smaller venues, stayed close to fans, often staying after shows to shake hands, take pictures, or just talk. People said he seemed different, quieter, wiser, as if prison had burned away everything but the truth. But life, as always, had another turn waiting. In 2015, Rob suffered a stroke caused by high blood pressure. He woke up one morning and couldn't move one side of his face. His baby mother rushed him to the hospital in the middle of the night. He survived, but the damage was deep. He had to relearn how to talk, how to rap, how to remember his own lyrics. He spent a year training his mind and mouth to work together again. That process, he said, was harder than prison. "You can escape a cell," he told a friend, "but you can't escape your own body." Yet, he did what he always did, fought back with patience and persistence. In 2015, he released another project titled Genuine Article through Slim Style Records, his way of saying, "I'm still here." He also joined a reality show called Comeback Kings on Bet, alongside artists like Ed Lover, Treach, and Mr. Cheeks, a series about musicians reclaiming purpose after fame fades. It wasn't about chasing glory, it was about finding peace in the ruins of what used to be. For many who watched, seeing Rob again felt like seeing an old friend who'd made it through the storm. He didn't talk about bitterness. He talked about blessings, about being alive, about having a story to tell. And maybe that was his quiet victory. Because for Black Rob, legacy was never about how long the world cheered. It was about the echo that remained when the cheering stopped. He once said, "If I can help just one kid from Harlem believe he got a shot, then I did my job." And in that simple statement, you could hear everything he stood for: humility, redemption, and truth. By the time 2021 arrived, Black Rob was tired. The body that had carried him through stages, tours, and late-night sessions was breaking down. His kidneys were failing again, and the long hours of dialysis were taking their toll. But Rob wasn't the kind of man who liked to be seen weak, so he kept moving, doing small shows, hoping to earn enough to stay afloat. He had begun working with a promoter named Cal Dawson, who tried to help him book performances and keep some money in his pocket. For a while, it worked. He stayed in hotels between cities, traveling light, living day to day. But when he stopped attending dialysis sessions, his health began to spiral fast. His friends, people with street names like Goldmouth and Cricket, looked after him when no one else did. They made sure he had food, a place to sleep, someone to talk to. They were his family when fame forgot. In early April 2021, tragedy struck the hip-hop world with the death of DMX. From his hospital bed, Rob recorded a short video sending love and prayers to X. His face looked fragile, his voice faint. "I've been dealing with this for 5 years," he said. 4 strokes, dialysis, no home to go to. It was a heartbreaking sight, a legend speaking softly from the margins of the world he once helped build. The video went viral. Fans who hadn't heard his name in years suddenly flooded social media with messages of shock and sorrow. "How did it come to this?" they asked. "How could the man behind Whoa be homeless?" It wasn't anger that filled those comments, it was guilt. After that clip spread, people stepped in. Producer Mike Zombie and former Bad Boy artist Mark Curry started a GoFundMe to help with his medical bills and housing. Jay-Z quietly donated $20,000. Puff paid for his hotel room for 2 weeks. Everyone wanted to help, but time was running out. Mark Curry later recalled visiting him at the hotel. He found Rob lying on the floor, too weak to stand. They rushed him to the hospital, but he refused treatment at first. He just wanted to rest, Curry said. He was tired. Hours later, he collapsed again. On the 17th of April 2021, Black Rob passed away from cardiac arrest caused by kidney failure. He was 52. Puff paid for his funeral but didn't attend. The service was filled with old friends, former label mates, and fans who remembered what his voice had meant. Outside, Harlem mourned quietly, a city that had raised him, tested him, and claimed him one last time. After his death, interviews surfaced Mark Curry, Gene Deal, JoJo Capone, even his cousin Crystal, all speaking out about what happened. The chaos over money and legacy, the questions that still lingered. But beneath all the noise, one truth remained clear. Black Rob had lived and died on his own term. He once said, "I ain't never asked for sympathy, just for people to listen." And they did, maybe too late, but they listened. The echoes of Whoa still ring through clubs, through memories, through Harlem streets that remember every word. Because for all the pain and the silence, Rob left behind something indestructible, a sound, a story, and a truth that still moves people who never even met him. In death, he finally found what he'd always searched for in life: peace. The lights of Harlem still flicker at night the same way they did when a young Robert Ross first dreamed of making his voice heard. Somewhere, in a car rolling down Lenox Avenue, "Whoa" might still come on the radio, and for a moment, the city remembers. Black Rob's story was never just about music. It was about endurance, about how a man can rise, fall, and rise again, even when no one's watching. He came from nothing, gave the world something unforgettable, and left behind lessons too honest to ignore. His life was proof that greatness doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes, it wears scars. He once said, "Everybody got a life story. Mine just happened to rhyme." Maybe that's why his name still feels sacred to those who knew his voice. His rhymes weren't built to sell records. They were built to tell truth, the kind that comes from pain, the kind that never fades. In the years since his passing, hip-hop has changed again: faster beats, louder fame, shorter memories. But when Whoa hits those first few bars, something timeless happens. The beat drops, and for 3 minutes, the world is back in 2000, back in a moment when one man from Harlem reminded us what authenticity sounds like. For all the talk about curses, maybe Black Rob's legacy wasn't tragedy at all. Maybe it was a reminder that the industry can forget names, but the people never forget truth. Every bar he wrote carried the rhythm of survival, the melody of Harlem, and the heartbeat of resilience. If you ever find yourself thinking about the ones who never got their flowers, think of him. Think of the man who turned hardship into art, who forgave more than he was given, and who left this world with his dignity intact. Because some stars don't fade when the lights go out. They just shine quieter in the corners of memory, in the songs that never age, in the streets that raise them. So tonight, as the city hums beneath its own heartbeat, remember his. This was the life story of Black Rob, the storyteller, the survivor, the sound of Harlem. If you believe stories like his deserve to be remembered, hit subscribe, share this video, and help us give these legends their flowers one story at a time.